Hey, everybody, welcome to another Around the Lens Roundtable discussion. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me, as always, is my co host, Zach Roberts. Hello, Zach.
Hello, how goes it?
It goes great, and it's great to have two returning panelists on the show, Mark E. Johnson and Rick Friedman. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's been a long day down here in Georgia. I spent most of the day at Mercedes-Benz Stadium with students, actually, at, of all things, a mini workshop. So there we go.
Awesome. Remind people of what you do
That's a long list of things.
for money,
For
Mark, for money,
that's a long list of things
What
as
you can tell
well.
people
Yeah.
that you do for money, okay?
My
publicly.
my my official title is Clinical Professor of Photojournalism and Chief Technology Officer for the College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia. I also am the director of the National Press Photographer Association's Best of Photojournalism competition. NPPA and the Best of Photojournalism competition are headquartered here at the University of Georgia.
Wonderful, wonderful. Can't wait to talk to you all about what's going on in the world of academia. And joining us all the way from Arizona, IA, is Mr. Rick Friedman. Rick, tell people who you are.
Good evening. I'm Rick Friedman, and I'm a freelance photojournalist, primarily being a magazine photographer. And we also do a lot of corporate photography. And I teach a lot of workshops. I teach a lot of, we call them location lighting workshops. And we've been lucky enough to teach them all over the US, up in Canada, across Europe, and into the Middle East.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
get to go meet a bunch of people and exchange information with them is what I call them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Have you been to Dubai?
I have a couple of
How was
times.
how was it?
It was great.
Okay.
It was just everything's totally over the top there.
Oh
No,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. I bet. I bet. Well, again, I brought you both on today because I think teaching in the era of AI and also just the overall nature of photography and photojournalism, where it's at professionally in terms of it being a viable career, I want to really get your all's take on some of the topics related to that. So we'll start with you, Rick, first, and talk a little bit about workshops. Talk to me about the kind of lighting workshop you teach, what you teach in it, and basically what students are essentially gaining when they take your workshop.
Sure. So the workshops, and a lot of them I teach with my partner Karen Summers, and then some of them I teach with Rick Farrow. We do the Rick and Rick photo workshops, and they're location lighting workshops. And they basically they can take various tracks. So I find you go, a lot of them are sponsored by camera stores, or I work with Pro Photo as one of their ambassadors. I also do the same thing with Tamron, so they may have me go to some place to teach. But for me, the lighting part of it is, and I find you do these workshops and you get some people who just come, who are professional photographers who have a lot of experience, and say, I like what Rick does, so I'll go. And if I come away with it with a couple of ideas, I mean, I like playing with gels, I like playing with smokes and creative lighting. And the last one we did, we had a rain machine, which
Wow,
was a lot of fun.
it's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, the rain machine's great. And, I've always been into using smoke machines, but now we have these new things called smoke ninjas, which are these little handheld smoke machines. So
Yeah,
we
I've seen
literally
those.
go on one end of it, really elaborate lighting. And I'll have a lot of people who will come for that. But then inevitably, you'll have a couple of people who show up who don't know the difference between an F stop and a subway stop. So my thing is, if you're nice enough to come to one of our workshops, I want you to learn. That's my goal. And, Karen will usually handle the people who need camera 101 before they get to lighting 101. But to me, a great workshop is by the middle of the first day, when somebody who was trying to hide in the back is telling me where they want to put the lights. To
Hmm.
me, that's a great sign. So the workshops are very hands-on. The subtitle of them is Lighting and Laughing. So if they're quiet, it's not working. If they're total chaos, we're having a good time. And we just bring lots of lights. And, the last one that we did, um, every one of these workshops, actually, we'd have to do what I call silly group photograph. The
Hmm.
idea behind silly group photograph originally, when I started teaching many years ago, was I wanted to prove I had a student. Well, now the idea of silly group photograph is to create a photograph which beats the heck out of the last one, whatever it is. So the last group, we had about 60 people. And instead of hiring models, we had a medieval reenactment troupe. So we had people sword fighting and riding horses and running through the woods, chasing each other. And we had the two people sword fighting on a bridge, and then we light painted them because we do a lot of light painting. So people come away with it. They may come in with, knowing the basics of a flash or not knowing much of anything about flash. And by the end of it, they know how to do a multi-light setup. The last one we did, having the horse and the hawk, that was unusual. I'd never had a horse and a hawk show up for one of my workshops. So they're really hands-on and just lots and lots of fun. And then, like I said, people love learning light painting. They just, and it's sort of funny because we cross the line of what I do as a journalist and then what I can do in workshops and what I can do in corporate photography. We just did an ad campaign for Amtrak, which was not photojournalism, but in some ways it was, because they wanted us to produce pictures that looked like, if it was set up, a journalist would have shown up and shot it that way.
Yeah.
So the fact that, we went to the rail yard 3 times.
Wow.
To get an idea. And this was great fun. I got to tell the engineer where I wanted the Acela. They brought the Acela, the new one, from DC to Boston. So Karen and I and Keiko, our shooting partner, could photograph it. And I'm telling the engineer where I want it. And I realized they're moving trains around wherever I asked them to move them. I felt like this is just like playing with trains, but I was playing with real ones. So, there's a case where obviously if I was working for a magazine or a newspaper, I show up and what is there I capture. When I'm working for the corporation, I show up and my job is to sell the product.
Right.
I was going to say I can get into it now or a little bit later, but the difference between when I am hired to do a portrait for a magazine and when I am hired to do a portrait for a corporation. And my approach to them is very different. Obviously, if it's for a magazine, true journalistic integrity comes into it. If it's not there, you're not putting it there.
Right.
If I am working for the corporation, it is my job to make her or him look as good as I can make them, which we can pick this up in a while, goes into when do you use AI and when do you not use AI.
So let me ask you this. Then
that was a long-winded answer.
I know, right? People are paying for these workshops, or their workshops are free because they're paid for by your corporate sponsors, or is it both?
Most of them people are paying for.
Okay.
So like
on average, what do you charge for a workshop?
Oh boy, it depends on where it is and how long it is.
Right.
But $299, and I just got hired for one that's going to be in the Midwest, and they're going to charge $1,000 for that one.
Wow.
So I am doing, normally the workshops are 2 to 3 days.
Wow. Okay.
I've got one that we're coming up. We're going to do the Mid-Atlantic Regional School in, I think, April or May. I probably should find out. And that one's a 5-day. So, and then, it's, let's say I did presentations at the Build Show that B&H put on in the fall. And that I was paid by Tamron to do. So some of them I am paid by the sponsors. Some of them I'm not. One of the things the sponsors provide is I get to show up at a workshop with enough pro photo gear for everybody to use it. So if you've never had you've never used the transmitter, or, if you're starting out, you're probably not going to go out and buy a pro photo B30. I mean, if the college students are doing that, dad's rich.
I wouldn't doubt it. So people are spending hundreds of, if not thousands of dollars to participate in your workshops. And you said they range from beginners to pros. And I'm just curious, again, like when you ask them what they're going to do with the knowledge they've gained from this, do any of them tell you, oh, this directly relates to monetary income for me, or I'm just doing this for the fun of it? Like you said, I just want to get some ideas. Like, what are the beginners doing with the knowledge you give them? And like, how many beginners are there? are they coming just with their phones, or do they have like dedicated cameras? Are these enthusiasts, hobbyists? Are there people who are, trying to become professionals and are using your knowledge to help elevate themselves?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, I start every workshop in roughly the same fashion, which is I assemble everybody and I start with going around the room and I say, please tell us your name, tell us what you do, and tell us what you would like to learn in this workshop. So now I have an idea where to go.
Right.
And as far as what people are doing with it, the people who don't have a lot of knowledge in lighting come because they maybe are going to go buy their first speed light and they want to learn what you can do with a speed light. And, I believe that, there's a lot of things you can do with strobe on camera. Firing it directly at somebody is not one of the good things to do, as I put it, if you don't like the subject, you're a paparazzi or they're just annoying and you want to make them look bad.
Hmm.
But, as everybody knows, you bounce it off a wall or reflector or a piece of foam core, and all of a sudden you've made directional light with that speed light on camera.
Yeah.
And usually in a workshop, we'll blow through that part really quickly.
Yeah.
And once I get that, now I say, now we're going to take it off the camera. Now let me, introduce you to transmitters. And oh, by the way, this is a light meter. And we just bring each tool in as we're going. So rather than, starting out with, 5 light stands and a whole bunch of strobes set up, which years and years ago, I remember going to a workshop from a very famous photographer who I will not mention. And just,
Oh.
I wanted to learn, back in the days when those of us who worked for magazines were shooting slide film and sending it in unprocessed, so it was like you kind of had to know what you were doing. And I remember going to this workshop and it was just like the guy had 3 assistants and I don't know, half a dozen lights and several models of my lights just went out. How's the light look? Is it okay still?
Yeah, you're fine.
At least
they
both went off at once. So now we know how long the batteries last in these pro
go.
photos. These are normally I would have big lights set up. So you have to forgive me that I didn't. But if it looks okay, I won't get up and change the batteries.
That's fine.
No,
That's
you're
great.
fine,
Nothing
buddy.
like having the lighting guy have his lighting fail.
I know, right? Well, we did talk about this beforehand. It was a concern. So we're going to go ahead and have you modulate your voice, and then you're just going to be a witness. So let me ask you, you've been doing this,
Oh, Karen
the
turned it
workshop
back on.
game. We've been doing the workshop game for a lot of years, right? Have
I
you seen
have.
have you seen a decline, an increase, or has it pretty much stayed the same with the amount of number and participants?
I think the number of participants are going up
Okay.
and they're willing to spend more money. And, one of the things I like when I teach the workshops, I tell people, look, here's a chance to play with toys you probably not normally get a chance to use.
Right.
So, there's that aspect of it. But, the last few we've done, we've had a lot of people. I mean, the last one that we did with the people sword fighting and taking each other hostage, it was great fun. We had them
Yeah.
running through fields and blowing smoke through the fields while they were sword fighting. It was terrific. But that one, I mean, fortunately, we had 4 instructors on that one. So it's like we could take a large group. I find that for a real hands-on workshop, I try not to make the group too big because I don't want people standing around waiting. I want everybody shooting. I want the enthusiasm that we all bring to our work. I want everybody to be happy and having a good time, So you need enough gear if you're providing the gear. You need enough models and you need enough instructors.
Right.
Otherwise, I've gone to workshops where people are standing in lines, when there are 10 people behind them. And that, to me, that's not right. So, I do sometimes have to say, this is not your private shoot, so you can only shoot, 8 or 10 frames and then pass the transmitter. Because inevitably there will be people who will think this is their private shoot.
Right.
But yeah, I find the interest is there. I mean, I have workshops coming up. Let me see. I will be in Charlotte in January. I'll be in St. Augustine and Miami in February. Let me see. Where am I going in March? March, I'm going to Little Rock. That's where I'm going in March. And then I was in Austin last week and stopped in to see the folks at Precision Camera, ironically, because I brought 200 plus pounds of gear with me and got there and said I didn't bring an egg crate for my strip light for the hairline light. So I went over to see them, and by the end of that, it's like you're coming back before the end of the winter to teach a workshop. So,
Yeah.
and then we have, like I said, the Mid Atlantic Regional School, which is great because that's 5 days. So, there's lots of time to be working with people. And then I know I'm going somewhere in June, but I don't remember where. So,
Yeah. Excellent,
Karen,
excellent. So I'm
oh,
glad to
right,
know.
right, right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Karen's reminded me that I'm forgetting an important one. So yes, there will be actually there are two coming up in New Jersey. We do them at a place called Work Studio in the Woods, which is this. Well, we thought it was a 5 acre studio until the guy realized he owned several more acres. So it's a total of about 9 acres out behind a small camera store called T&F Camera in Vineland, New Jersey. And there are antique cars back there, and that's where the rain machine is. There were these huge flower gardens. There's a 3-story circular staircase to nowhere. It's just stuck in the ground. And I've been pushing for a couple of years that I really wanted a crashed airplane. So I have been informed by the time I go back in the spring, they will have a crashed airplane for me to use as a prop. It's a
Nice.
great place. And then in the fall, instead of having the medieval reenactors back, that group
Mhm.
was called Swords and Stories, and they were wonderful. We actually have a Civil War reenactment troupe coming, and they're going to bring their cannons, and apparently they're going to set up an encampment out in the woods. So that'll be a 3-day, rather different workshop. So
Yeah.
that's the idea is that everybody learns a lot. They have a good time. My definition of a good workshop is similar to my definition of a good photo shoot, which is one where everybody's laughing when they leave. So the idea is to have fun, and I stay in touch with these people, and I tell people, who are nice enough to come to one of my workshops that, there's a lot of information that's being tossed around. And, if you get home and in a week, a month, or a year, you say, gee, I remembered steps 2 through 8, but I don't remember step 1 and 10. Write to me. And I tell people, if you're nice enough to come to one of my workshops, then you're always one of my students. And I hear from people who took one of my workshops months ago, years ago. I have people write to me, I've gotten to this point in my career. I need to buy a lens, or I need to buy, what do you recommend? Which is really nice. I take that as an extreme compliment that they're actually, interested enough, and they actually listened enough to think we had something valuable to say. And I'll leave the workshops with one last thought. So I mentioned that I do a lot of these workshops with Rick Farrow, who's an old friend of mine. Rick Farrow is the senior wedding photographer at Disney. Farrow
Wow.
shoots more weddings in one stint than most people want to shoot in a life. I think his record is like 22 days of weddings straight.
Oh my God.
And, for those folks who want to spend I don't know why you'd want to get married at Disneyland anyway, but for those people who want to get married at Disneyland and spend a pile of money, they want to get married with the castle, which means the wedding has to be over and people have to be out of the park before the park opens at 8 a.m. So he's meeting brides at 5 o'clock in the morning, which to me doesn't sound like much fun. But the idea of the Rick and Rick photo workshops, where two photographers, both of them are pretty good at lighting, and are more or less trying to get to the same place, but have very different approaches.
Right. Okay.
To me, when I'm teaching and directing, I give somebody an idea of what I want, and then I try to pull it out of them. I am not looking at every angle of their hands. If I don't like something, I will say that, but I try to guide people through it. Whereas Rick sees exactly what he wants instantly and
Yeah.
knows it. And I think it's the background of being a photojournalist. You don't touch the subjects. You don't tell people, you may tell them where to stand or ask them to stand there, but you're not really directing them very much.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's,
100%.
my approach to this day in my work.
Yeah, absolutely. So glad to know that workshops are
Mhm.
not suffering with the
No,
advent of photos being less and less desirable as a sort of paid profession. So let's then turn it over to Mr. Johnson. Mark, tell us why are students attending a photojournalism course in this day and age? What's driving them to want to take a photojournalism course, and what do you tell them when you have to be honest about their prospects and sort of finding work after they get their degree, or maybe there's a great opportunities out there I'm not even thinking about. So what's it like from your perspective as a professor?
So I'll start with a couple of things. This is my 21st year of teaching here at the University of Georgia.
Woo!
And prior to teaching here, I was teaching at a place I think David knows a little something about, because for those of
Go
you who don't
Orange.
know, David is one of my former students from Syracuse
did
University.
not know that.
That's how we met 23 years ago. Is that right? 23,
Sounds
20,
about right. Yeah.
2003, 2004, sometime around there.
2004, 2005. That's when I
Yeah,
went.
yeah.
Oh, how did I not know that? I went to SU in 2003, 2004, or
Okay.
2002,
Yeah.
2003 in the but I was in the art I was in the under Laura Heyman.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
we
I just
just missed we just missed each
yeah,
other, Zach.
as well.
Yeah, I am a twice peeled Syracuse alum. I did both my undergrad and my grad work there, and I'm not ashamed to say it took me 15 years to get my 4-year undergraduate degree.
Wow.
So I did 3.5 years, ran out of money, went and worked for 12 years, and then went back to school.
Same.
And when I went back, they asked me to stick around to do a grad degree, and change the
Nice.
course of what I'd done. So
Took
as
me
I was
9 years
saying,
to get my bachelor's degree, so I don't feel bad.
hey, you know. Um, I can tell the story of Minla Shields, who was a student here at the University of Georgia in the 1970s. In the summer of 1975, she had the photo internship at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She came back for the fall quarter, and halfway through the fall quarter, the AJC called and offered her a staff job. And she dropped out in the middle of the semester and spent 33 years rising up to Deputy Director of Photography at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And when she retired in 2008, she took a buyout. I was talking to her, and she told me the story of dropping out and being 4 or 5 classes short. And I told her she needed to come back to UGA, and she laughed at me. And 15 months later, she walked across the stage with her bachelor's degree,
Wow.
35 years after she was supposed to graduate. So,
Wow.
um,
No honorary degree. I feel like that's like give a couple extra credits.
honorary degrees,
I know. Yeah.
unofficially, there's some cash transactions that go on with those, and anybody working in
Ooh,
Yeah.
journalism probably doesn't have the cash for that. So,
Yeah,
interesting.
fair. Yeah.
David, to go back to your question, as I started to say, I've been here for just over 20 years. When I started here, the photojournalism program was just me. Um, there were 3 classes in the program. It was an emphasis within the journalism majors that we had at the time. As of August 1 of this year, we're now up to 4 photojournalism faculty members, including our newest hire, which is the night chair in visual journalism. We hired Andrea Bruce. She joined our faculty over the summer. And the night chair is an endowed position from the Knight Foundation. So those are kind of big deals. We have the 4 of us. We've got the National Press Photographers Association. We've got the Best of Photojournalism competition. Um, we are a target for an awful lot of students. I now get phone calls and emails from students around the country who are interested in pursuing careers in photojournalism, and they want to talk to us. So the interest for us is pretty significant. Those first couple of years that I was teaching here, I'd have 12 or 13 students in a class. We're now running our classes at 20 students with waiting lists. So the demand is there for our program. We're still not a photojournalism major. We're still just a sequence within the journalism major. And as far as I'm concerned, I kind of want to keep it that way,
Hmm.
because that allows us to make sure that our students come out really well rounded. They can make great visuals, but they can also write, they can also edit, they can produce video, they can do design work, they can do graphics work. The focus of what we're trying to do here at Georgia is to make sure that we're preparing students to work in whatever field exists when they walk out the door here. So today, as I said earlier, I was at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It was the Georgia high school flag football state championships today. So we had students there covering that in partnership with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So if you go on the AJC's varsity websites right now and look at the flag football photographs, that's all student-produced work. And the students who were doing that work have also been selected for a summer project next year, where some of them are going to be going to Mexico and some of them are going to Canada to cover the Men's World Cup in partnership with the Associated Press. So for the last Paralympic Games last year, Women's World Cup in Australia in 2023, a couple of other projects. We partner with the Associated Press and we bring our students there and they work with the Associated Press photographers and editors to move images around the world. Um, the question that you really want to get at here is, David, is there value in a photojournalism education or a journalism education? And I'm going to tell you that there absolutely is. Because journalism and photojournalism, I think, is sort of the perfect major to have at a university because it forces you to bring all of these different threads that you've got in your education together and do something with it. Many years ago in a course evaluation, I had a student who wrote this, and I can remember it almost verbatim, but if you need the quote, I can go dig it out because I saved it.
Hmm.
They said that this wasn't just a class about photography or journalism or photojournalism. It was a class about photography and journalism and photojournalism and history and economics and sociology and psychology and anthropology and chemistry and physics and optics
Hmm.
and dance. Yes, sometimes we danced. I
Hmm.
did not dance. I do not dance. I'm just going to put that
Oh.
out there very quickly. But the idea in our classes is that the technical side of photography, you can learn that through reading camera manuals. You can learn that through YouTube videos. You can learn that through workshops, right? You can learn the basics that way. You can learn really advanced skills like the lighting workshops Rick was just talking about. Um, what we're doing in our classes, though, is not just telling you how to make a picture, but how to tell a story. And in order to tell a story, you have to be able to find a story, which means that you need to understand how people interact. You need to understand how money moves through a community. You have to understand how medical processes work. You have to understand how basic science research works. You have to understand kinesiology to understand the physics of sporting events. All of these are things that we're pulling from all of these different classes and we're talking about in our photojournalism classes. I spent about 15 years as a working photojournalist before I converted full time over to teaching. And I still, in the back of my brain, self identify as a photojournalist. Uh, I only told one story about a journalist. But for 15 years, working 6, 7 days a week, I told stories about business owners and told stories about nurses and I told stories about firefighters and I told stories about athletes and politicians and teachers and all of these other things. That's the value of a good journalism education is it gives you the power to be able to walk up to anybody and say, "What are you doing? Let me share your story with somebody else." Now, I'm also going to say that because this is the next question you're going to ask me is how many of my alums are working photojournalists? And I'd say conservatively 30%, maybe 35%. But all of them have taken skills out of this program that they're able to apply in businesses. They're able to apply in political careers. Um, I have here in Athens, Clarke County, where I live and where the university is, I have one police officer on the Athens, Clarke County Police Department who's an alum, and the chief magistrate judge in Athens, Clarke County is one of my alums as well. So my biggest fear is Jessica pulls me over, Kelly arraigns me. That's sort of like the fear that I have right now. Now, they're both were great students, so I think I'm okay with them. But a good journalism career is going to prepare you for a good journalism education is going to prepare you for almost any career that you could want. Because if you think about what we do as journalists, we're training or journalism educators, we're training people how to ask questions. We're training
Yeah.
people how to observe. Rick, I've followed your work since the 1990s.
Thank you.
And your lighting is exquisite, right? And
Thank
your
you.
ability to
Appreciate
light
that.
really complicated things, I've seen it again and again and again. But it's the portraiture work that I've seen you do. And that is on the surface, it's about lighting, but at the core, it's about connecting with those people and figuring out
That's
how do you tell that story. And that's what a great liberal arts education does, is it teaches you how to connect. It teaches you how to observe. So
Right.
I'm listening to you say that. And to me, and I tell the folks who attend my workshops is the most important thing is your ability to connect with your subject in
yep,
your very limited amount of time. In order to do that, I need to know what they do.
Mhm.
Right.
And therefore, we make a point of researching everybody. As soon as we get a name of who we're going to be photographing, we start researching them because I want to know everything that I can know about them. So, as I put it, I can ask one vaguely intelligent question because when you live up the street from Harvard and MIT, I can't even understand half their bios, let alone what they actually do.
Yeah.
But I find, and I'm assuming you're going to agree with me, I find that, when we go in and ask, okay, one of my favorite ones was I said, okay, I I don't really understand string theory, but I certainly don't understand beyond string. And the professor is looking at me going, when did you learn this? And I said, oh, the last 4 days I've been reading everything I could find.
Yeah.
Why? Because I was going to get to meet you today.
Mhm.
And we've used that, when we were assigned to photograph Anthony Hopkins. My assistant and I sat around and watched his first three movies. So
Mhm.
we could talk about that. And again, same question, when did you see this? And I think, for me, the best part about being a photojournalist are the people we get to meet, the lives we get to drop into.
Yep.
And, the fact my sarcastic line about it is, it's the only profession where you can spend the morning in the Oval Office with the president and the evening in the gutter with the druggies. And you have to be able to relate to everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe not the druggies quite as much, but you have to be able to relate to people. Listening to you say this, Mark, is really terrific.
Yeah.
I think I want to come down and take a course.
Uh, just so you know, one of the running jokes amongst the faculty at the University of Georgia is most of us would not be accepted into our own programs. The quality of the kids that we have coming into these programs will just absolutely melt your brain sometimes.
Hmm.
They're so much smarter than we are in many, many ways. I think one of the great advantages to being a photojournalist is for those of us who are insatiably curious about the world, who look at something and stop and stare at it and go, what is going on here? Having that camera gives us the ability to walk up, like I said before, to almost anybody and say, who are you and what are you doing? And then to figure out how to learn enough about that so that we can accurately and truthfully tell that story to somebody else, right?
Hmm.
Because I know lots of people who are really, really curious. They read lots of books, they want to watch lots of movies, they're on the internet all day long, but for
Hmm.
them, it's just a consumption thing. I think
Yeah.
for most of us who are visual storytellers, it's the sharing that's probably more important than the consumption, right? So, so
I
David,
think it's not always the knowledge, but it is your ability to go up to that person and start that conversation, whether it's an assignment or I think we've all had these assignments where you're sent to some event and you obviously haven't researched the people. You might have researched the event, but you go up to people and just talk to them. And you're right, the camera is sort of the barrier.
yeah.
I mean, you see those situations where everything's being evacuated for some danger, and the photojournalists are running in, going, "Can't hurt me. I've got a camera."
Yeah.
But our ability to interact is the best part of the job. I
You know,
mean,
Lynn Johnson, the National Geographic photographer, had a quote
yeah,
in the
we
article.
were at Black Star at the same time.
Yeah, there's a quote that I show in my class, and I'm going to try and get it right here. She said that one of the greatest joys in life is to knock on somebody's door and ask to come in and to be let in. And I think that ability to understand people, understand the journey they're on, and to care about them is the greatest skill that we can transfer over to our students. So David, I have a quiz for you. Um,
Oh, Jesus.
so we
Flashbacks to Syracuse
Yes.
right
Yeah.
now.
So we're gonna go back to Photo 505, which was the photojournalism class that you took at Syracuse,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
which you took with David Sutherland
Of course. Yeah. Good
and
old
me.
Dave.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
retired now.
He is retired. Dave told you something on the first day that there were three things that if you could do them consistently, you would be successful as a photographer. Do you remember what those three things are?
I believe they're lighting, moment, and composition. Or my
You're really close. The first is fill the frame. The second is
that's
control your
composition.
background. The
That's part of
third
composition.
is wait for moments.
Yeah.
And I was looking to see if I have one, and I don't have my business card here, but on the back of my business card for the University of Georgia, there are four things that are listed. It's fill the frame, control your backgrounds, wait for moments. And the fourth one, which I think is actually more important, is care. If you care about the people that you're covering, and you care about the people that you're covering them for, and you care about the people that you're covering them with, it's going to show in your photographs every single time. And if I can be proud of one thing that I've managed to accomplish at the University of Georgia in our classrooms over the last 20 years is the students know how to care. And, Rick, you were talking about students from your workshops coming back to you with questions months, weeks, months, years afterwards. I've got the same thing. Every spring, there's at least one Saturday that I'm sitting on my couch or I'm out doing yard work and my phone buzzes and I pick it up and there's a text message from a former student and it's a photograph of them and 3 or 4 other former students at somebody's wedding. Because after they left the class, they've stayed connected to each other. And that sense of community is incredibly, incredibly important. So, one more value to a journalism education, going through something that shared experience as part of a cohort is going to set you up for life because you're going to know that there are other people out there that are sharing the same experiences that you are,
Yeah,
and you're going
it's
to have
funny.
access to them.
It seems like sometimes, for those of us who do this for a living, that everybody we know is a photographer or a photojournalist. And then you realize that it's really not that big a community, and we run into each other occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
But the exchange of ideas and information to me is, there are things I get jobs, and I scratch my head sometimes. It's like who can I call and pick their brain,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think you said like, you might not be able to get into your own program. Well, I come from the world of shoot and ship, which I have to admit, as a magazine photographer, was by far my favorite time.
Mm-hmm.
You shot the job, you figured out how to be there, you figured out how to do it right, and you put it all in an envelope and you scribbled your last name on the top of envelope, process normal, and I don't know, maybe it was Clinton campaigning in Iowa, end of caption, call a courier.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to our world today where, I missed it by a stop and a half. That's an easy adjustment. Back then you missed by a stop and a half. You better hope you had something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting, I have a number of, because of the way I would preface it, because of the way I was lucky enough to learn to do this, which I started out in selling triacs in a camera store in Harvard Square, which I was not qualified to do. And there were several people who came in with photojournalists who would tell me about their lives and, the places they went and the people they got to meet. And, one of them was a magazine photographer. And, he told me he made enough money to drive a Porsche. I said, I want to do this. And, but they took me in and taught me. I mean, I didn't pay them. George Riley from UPI was really my mentor as a photojournalist. And when George was a young man, somebody took him in and taught him the trade. And he never forgot that. And any kid who was willing to come in, George was a staff for United Press International. And we used to call it the UPI School of Photojournalism. Tuition was you brought coffee every time you came to the office. And, Georgie taught me this, and things that you just said when you said that list of things you do, George, that was one of the things. One of his lines was, put the State House in the background, meaning place your picture. And of course, now I can never make a picture with the State House in the background without thinking how George taught me. But he taught me I think because of the way I was lucky enough to learn, because I did not go to college to study photojournalism. I studied special ed, which completely explains why I'm a photojournalist. But because of that, I have always had college students and young photographers who, if they want to come and hang out at the studio, I am very happy to share information. I don't really think it's a formal education. There's one young lady I met, a little over 5 years ago, when she started at Harvard as a freshman. It was like opening event, and I was covering something at Harvard. And she came up to me and said, do you know where I can take a lighting course? There are no lighting classes here. And I said to Dylan, yeah, you want to come to the studio and hang out and carry heavy objects? I'll teach you lighting. Well, she went to Harvard, and her first job out of Harvard is she is the number 2 photographer for the 49ers.
Wow.
Not a bad gig right out of college.
No.
But
Yeah.
over the
No.
years, I've had tons of people, some of whom have gone on to be quite famous, who
Yeah.
have come through and schlepped my lights.
Wow.
People used to say I never saw a picture you could light with 2 lights, and I didn't want to light with 12. So,
Yeah.
I,
but
I
a
want
lot of Mark, exactly what you're saying. It just you, I couldn't agree with you more.
to, I want to go back to something you said a few moments ago, because I learned photography from my dad back in the 1970s, and it was all Kodachrome 25,
Hmm.
and so we'd shoot 20 frames because he would buy the 20 exposure rolls, not 24, the 20s back then,
Wow.
and
I
you'd
didn't know even
rewind
that
it.
existed.
Yeah, before it was 24, it was 20. Um, and after your 20 pictures, you'd rewind it and you'd put it in a little yellow envelope and you'd mail it to Rochester, New York. And 3 weeks later, a little yellow box would come back with your photographs there. And, Rick, when you and I were coming up, that sense of craft, of skill was so incredibly important, right? That ability to make sure that your ectochromes were perfectly exposed, to make sure that your color balance was exactly right on all of these things. And we spent a lot of time doing that. And there are a lot of photographers who were really, really excellent craftsmen, craftspersons that could get it sharp, get it properly exposed and color corrected day in and day out. We're now in an era where the tools are so much better that it has really democratized the photography aspect of visual storytelling. And one of the things we talk about with the students is it's not enough to know how to operate your camera and to show up. You have to be able to see something different. Um, I said before that I spent some time working at newspapers in Massachusetts, and I was at the Lawrence Eagle Tribune for a year and a half. Lawrence at the time was a rough and tumble city. There was an arson problem that was running rampant up there. There were some gangs, some really, really great parts of that community that I loved telling. But an awful lot of my job was working nights and chasing fire trucks and ambulances and police cars. When I started teaching here 20 years ago, I taught them how to cover spot news, and I dropped that out of the curriculum 10 years ago. And the reason for that is by the time they can get there, there's already 10 people on the sidewalk with their phones.
Yeah.
So we have to be looking beyond the obvious to find stories that matter every single day. If you're standing there and there's 15 or 20 other photographers, chances are you're not going to make any money off of that shoot. You've got to put yourself in a position where nobody else is. Um, I was a stringer for the Associated Press in Boston for several years, and prior to that, I was a stringer for Agence France Presse. AFP is the third largest wire service, or was at the time in the U.S. behind AP and Reuters. And my AFP editor said, when you go to Fenway Park, don't sit on the first base side next to the AP, Reuters, Boston Globe, and Boston Herald photographers, because if your picture looks the same as all of theirs, nobody's going to pick it up. Go sit on the third base side.
I always
And
like sitting on the third base side better.
yeah. The fun part was is occasionally you ended up in the background of the photographs from the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald. And so I have a couple of those clips sitting in a filing cabinet here. But what I talk with my students now is about understanding your community and figuring out where the deeper stories are. To go to the rally that's down in front of the arch, the ceremonial entrance for the university, that's the starting point. But once you go there, you got to talk to people and say, why are you here? Why does this issue matter to you? And then go photograph that because they're going to post on social media pictures of the rally itself. If you make
Yeah.
those same pictures, you're not going to get them out for half an hour after they are. There's no value in that. But going deeper, that storytelling, that understanding the history, the politics, the economics, the sociology, the psychology, the anthropology, taking all of that stuff and applying that to our storytelling is where the value in a photojournalism or a journalism education comes in right now.
Yeah, it's
Well,
interesting. You mentioned AFP, and when the Brown story broke, AFP called me
Mhm.
and said, "Would you go?" And I said, "Great, but I'm several thousand miles out of position."
Yeah.
So,
Let me
and
ask you
that
something,
means
Mark.
probably no degrees out too.
Yeah.
I want to ask you something, Mark, because I think, and maybe I don't want to make sure I missed it, but you said that there aren't photojournalism degrees at the University of Georgia. It's a photojournalism track within a journalism degree. Is that correct?
Yep. That is true.
So if I wanted to just get a straight photojournalism degree, I couldn't get that at your school. Is that correct?
So So let me ask you this. Why do you want a straight photojournalism degree?
I don't. I have a photojournalism degree, but that's from 20 years ago, 20 plus
Mhm.
years ago. I don't know why anyone would want just a photojournalism degree. So that's what I was trying to ask. Like, it's
Yeah,
not.
so there's lots of reasons to want that. One, you're going to come out with a deeper technical skill set, right? So depending upon how you look at our curriculum right now, it's 3 or 4 classes that make up the photojournalism sequence within the journalism major. Um, if editors call me to talk about our students for recruiting for internships, jobs, looking for freelancers, whatever it happens to be, the first thing I'm going to tell them is their portfolio is going to be a little bit greener. Our program is just a little bit shorter, than a Syracuse or a Western Kentucky or a Missouri or an Ohio. Those are programs where you're going to have 6, 8, maybe more photography classes, photojournalism classes, portrait, illustration, studio classes,
Hmm.
whatever they happen to be. We're cramming an awful lot of information into just 3 classes. Now, because it's just those 3 classes at the moment, and now that we're up to 4 faculty members, we're putting additional classes on the books. We're in 2027, we'll teach our first sports photojournalism class in partnership with our Carmichael Sports Media Institute that I work with very, very closely. We're adding a picture editing and entrepreneurship class that's going to talk about management as well as
Good.
innovation and entrepreneurship. We're adding a portrait illustration
That's great.
class. We're adding classes over the next couple of years now that we're up to 4 faculty members. Hmm. To make up for the shortage in classes, we're pretty heavy on the workshop. So um, every fall we run a workshop in the advanced photojournalism class. And you're all going to say, this sounds like a lot of fun. So I'm going to say it right up front. I take all of my students, all 20 of the students in the advanced photojournalism class, to the Georgia National Fair every October.
Oh,
It's 2 hours,
Does sound like a lot of fun.
2.25 hours south of us. It's the largest state fair. On the day that we're there, which is usually the first Saturday in October, there's 40 to 50,000 attendees that are on the fairgrounds. The west half is all your carnival rides, it's the amusements, it's the games, it's the foods, it's the vendors. The east side is the agricultural side. That's all of your livestock competitions, that's all of your produce competitions, all of that stuff. When we start the day, I give the students a very simple charge. I tell them, don't show me what the fair looks like, show me what it means. And they have to go find the stories that are out there. Now you're thinking, this sounds like a blast. We start at 7:30 in the morning and we finish at midnight. So this is a 17-hour long workshop, and I'm bringing in 6 to 8 pros to act as coaches. And so we set up a little newsroom. We've got an editing site on the fairgrounds. Students can go out and work for 90 minutes or 2 hours, come in, download their cards, sit with one of these pros, get feedback, go right back out. So over the course of that day, they'll have 5 to 7 edit sessions with professionals that come in from around the region to work with the kids. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, for much of the last 11 years that we've been doing this, publishes the student work. In the spring, in our documentary photojournalism class, we kind of take that model and we put it on steroids. Every year, I choose a different rural Georgia county, and the students research story ideas in that county, and then we go to the county for 3 days. I put them up in hotels in the county so that they don't have to drive back and forth. And Friday, Saturday, and till 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, they go out, work on their stories for 3, 4 hours, come in, sit with these pros, get feedback, go right back out. And at both of the workshops, the pros are encouraged. Look, if you think it's going to be beneficial for the students to go out in the field with them, get in your car and go. Take your cameras, shoot alongside them, look over their shoulder, give them feedback on the back of their cameras. That sort of intensive workshopping is really, really valuable because the growth curve on those 2 days is a vertical line.
I would imagine.
The difference between where they start and where they
hmm.
finish is absolutely staggering. And those
Yeah.
things have become these signature events for our program. It allows us to deal with technical stuff. So if we have students that are struggling with color balance, that want to learn more about lighting, that are still having issues controlling their backgrounds or filling their frames, whatever it happens to be, that can get worked on. And the students who are a little further along in the program that need some coaching on how do I talk to this person and get them to open up a little bit more? How do I sequence this set of photographs? What am I missing in this 5 or 7 photo package that I'm trying to produce here? Those are the things that we can get worked out here. So a long-winded way of saying that even without a photojournalism major here, the students self-identify as photojournalism majors. And
Yeah.
occasionally I see them on LinkedIn and I have to send them an email saying, you have a fact error on your resume because you were not a photojournalism major at the University of Georgia. You're a journalism major at the University of Georgia. So,
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting concept, and I think that's the right way to go because ultimately you have to have a sort of pseudo jack of all trades in the journalism sector. And I think what it means to be a journalist is no longer limited by or sectored off in terms of the technology that you have. It doesn't matter if you're writing a story or you're taking a picture or shooting a video, you're doing the job of a journalist, which is to capture something and put it out there in the world so that other people can learn about it, right? And so like you said, I mean, you have the photojournalism track, and journalism degree, I imagine, also includes like a video track and all those multimedia aspects, right? So
Yep.
it's not just writing
Right.
anymore.
I
Mark, are you teaching the business of photography?
Oh, I am so glad that you asked that. We spend 2 weeks in our introduction to photojournalism class on business practices. We run them through cost of doing business calculations. We run them through contracts and contract negotiations. We run them through copyright. Yeah, there's
Right.
no way a student isn't getting out of my program without knowing how to write a business plan.
Yeah, because
Because so many of them are ending up working for themselves. They're running small businesses, and so
that's
and I encourage them go over to the business college and take a small business class. Because learning how to set up an LLC, learning the protections that offers you, the advantages it gives you for taxes, for health insurance, for having the business make money and not and then paying you the salary. All of those are critical things for them to learn how
yeah.
to
I
do.
mean,
yeah.
one of the things, I know a number of young photographers, and they're happy they get a day rate here and there from a wire service.
Yeah,
And I try to nicely explain that the problem is when you and I worked for a wire service, all they cared about was the frame they used, and we got to take home the rest of the take.
right.
um you know and that those metal file cabinets in my office and my work at various photo agencies, yeah,
The ones right
that
behind me.
yeah, those exactly. I have
This
that exact same wall.
this is the Associated Press 1993 to 1995 in those four drawers right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
So much history.
I try to nicely explain that, you don't own the copyright on a lot of your work. And I make a reasonable percentage of my living out of the relicensing
Yep.
of my work. I mean, I had a call the other day from somebody who is producing a Netflix, I guess, three-part series on Nancy Kerrigan. And they said, we saw your name on some press conference photograph. Do you have any other friends from the conference? And I thought about it real quick. I said, I have way more than that
Hmm.
because I did several one-on-one shoots with her.
Hmm.
And, I don't quite know how many of my images are going to buy. There are going to be a number of them. And then the other one, and I will tell this story, but I have to preface how these pictures were created really quickly. So 2004, I get a phone call from one of the German magazines, and they say, Rick, we're doing a story. I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday next week, and it's being billed as the Great Minds of Cambridge. Would you like to photograph this? And I love shooting academia. It is really my favorite thing. I have this illusion that if I hang out with enough wicked smart people, that maybe it will rub off. It hasn't yet. So anyway, I go to this event and I probably have photographed at least a third. There were like 40 faculty members from Harvard and MIT, and I've probably photographed at least a third of the people in this room. And I know who everybody else in the room is by sight, except two people. And one gentleman, I'm talking with him, and again, because I know people, because I do my research, so I'm talking with this gentleman and I said, oh, are you from MIT? And we just haven't met. He said, no, I'm from Princeton. And it was a gentleman named Robert Trivers. And the other gentleman keeps popping into every picture. So I'm doing a picture of Larry Summers and Alan Dershowitz. And this guy pops into the middle of the picture and everybody's buddy. And this keeps happening. So I said to one of the professors who I know, I said, well, who is this gentleman? And he said, oh, that's Jeffrey. He just gave us $16 million. Well, right. We all know who Jeffrey is at this
Yeah.
point. There was
Oh, yeah.
anything out of the ordinary. My thought as a photojournalist was if this guy gave them $16 million to set up a new foundation, I really ought to do some portraits of this gentleman.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, there's a portrait of him in a Harvard sweatshirt that's everywhere. So that body of work, it was a freelance assignment for a magazine. The magazine ran it. I think in probably the next 8 or 10 years, maybe one or two pictures were sold. All that stuff at that point, I was with Corbis, so all the work went to Corbis. Well, all of a sudden, the story becomes what the story is, and those pictures, pretty much anything of him where he is by himself and still alive, um, all those pictures, the purple couch, all of that is from my archives. And I mention this because it makes the point of own your copyright, and
Yeah.
what is the value of your work and what do you license it for?
Right.
Um, I mean, obviously I have a lot of work, the vast majority of my work doesn't make any money, but I have a number of pictures. I have Mark Zuckerberg at Harvard as an undergraduate with him alone and his with his Chris Hughes, who was his roommate, and those pictures licensed. I don't know if you can hear it. There's an airplane flying overhead. Um, those pictures licensed all the time. So I have a
Uh,
number of takes that relicense. But if I didn't own that copyright, then whoever owned the copyright would be making the money. So it's
yeah.
something I try to instill in people is the value of your work. And yes, everybody has got an iPhone today. So a lot of things that we would make pictures of that made money as an agency photographer aren't going to make you much money today.
Nope.
So
But you
anyway,
got no, you make a good point, I think, with regard to capturing those historical moments and if being in the right place at the right time, which is also kind of a segue into sort of the last thing we'll talk about, which is the Nick Ut and Stringer controversy with regard to the documentary. We did a review on this, Zach and I, which Zach is dutifully putting together the final bits and pieces of so we can get out soon. But at the end of the day, we kind of have differing opinions about how it was presented, but and I know you watched it as well, Mark, but did Nick Ut take the photo of Napalm Girl or not? Right? That's what the documentary asks. And what do you think?
You really want me to go off on this one?
I was
Give
going to
me,
say
give me.
before you start, let me just throw this out. Did you read David Burnett's op-ed? Believe it was last week.
I did.
Okay.
I've read Burnett's piece. I've read both of the Associated Press reports. I've read the World Press Photo decision to take Nick's name off of it. Um, and I had read all of that before seeing it. I watched the documentary with two of my colleagues here on Saturday. Um, we'd been trying to put the four of us together, and we finally got time for the three of us to get together. And the documentary runs about an hour 50. It took us 3 and a quarter, almost 3.5 hours to get through it because we kept hitting pause to have discussions about different segments of it. Um, at the end of that time frame, we made the decision that we are probably not going to have our students watch it because we don't feel that it is journalistically put together. Um, we had concerns. I'm going to stop saying we because I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I think we're in fairly close alignment on these things. Uh, I have grave concerns over the why behind it. There was a faculty member here at the University of Georgia who taught here for 28 years until he passed away 8 years ago next month. His office was next to mine for the first 12 or 13 years that I worked here. We were very, very close friends. Barry Hollander taught the intro reporting class for his 27 or 28 years here at the University of Georgia. And the thing that he hammered into all of his students, all of his reporting students, was you have to figure out what do people know, how do they know it, and why are they sharing it with you? And that last one is probably more important than the first two, because if you don't understand the motive behind why somebody is telling you a story, you've got you've got to be suspect of everything that they tell you. And that documentary, to me, feels like a white Englishman on a journey. It does not feel like a story about Nick Ut. It feels like here's the great white hope coming in here to correct the failings of a system in a Southeast Asian country. Um, it the phrase that kept coming up in our conversations was colonialist. This is exactly the same issue that's happened in countries all around the world over the last, 500 years. As superpowers have grown and come in and made decisions that impacted the lives of local people and then left. And then the way that that whole story was presented of here's the great white Englishman and he's going to come in and he's going to solve all the problems. Hmm.
Yeah.
I felt it was a deeply, deeply flawed. They don't prove their point. It's not definitive. The forensic experts that they brought in have, from what I read elsewhere, never had any of their evidence admitted into court. The Associated Press went back and had different forensic experts look at it and said that their math was wrong on it if you read the Associated Press report. And I think one of the most damning parts of the documentary is they re-edited it before it was released on Netflix. So this was released originally at Sundance back in February. Prior to World Press Photo looking at the image again, prior to the second Associated Press report coming out, they re-edited it after the original release. So they've modified the story to try and make it resonate with facts that and reports that have come out afterwards. To me, that's really suspicious. So
Yeah.
the question that we kept asking ourselves is why?
That was the question I was just going to ask you. Why?
Yeah. Um, the former Associated Press editor, who was there in Saigon that day, Carl Robinson, who's the one who started this claim that the photograph was not Nick Utz. Um, I go back to what Barry Hollander taught students for nearly 3 decades. What did he know? How did he know it? Why is he sharing it now? And his argument that he didn't want to bring this up while several of the parties were still alive, meaning Horst Foss, is incredibly suspect.
Hmm.
If you believe this to be true, why would you not raise it immediately? I mean, he worked for the Associated Press for another 5 or 6 years afterwards. There's
Yeah,
various
that's
stories as to why he left the Associated Press. He
He, he wrote a book. He
he
wrote a
wrote a
book and
book,
didn't include it.
and it's not included. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's very suspicious. That's all. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
to answer your question directly, David, because I do remember your question,
Hmm.
did Nick make the photograph? My answer is I have seen no evidence to say that he did not make the photograph, and therefore I have to go with what the historical record and the Associated Press claims that Nick made that photograph.
Okay.
I say
Uh,
I had the pleasure long before this came out of sitting around one evening with David, and somehow I know actually what it was. We were both teaching at one of my favorite photo events, which is in Sharjah, UAE, which is called an exposure. And they bring a number of photographers in from around the globe. But we were sitting around and David was talking about this and telling the story, and there was, he was saying, if he'd been paying better attention or planned better, he might have made the picture. But he didn't, but he was
Because he
there
was
to
reloading his Leica.
huh?
Because he
Well, if
was
the damn
reloading
thing
his
was
Leica.
easier to
Yeah.
reload, he might have made the picture.
Yeah.
um, so I mean, I honestly don't know any more about it than, to say that, I mean, this is what I heard from David. I know people who have sat around with Nick and talked about it, and don't understand why this film needed to be made, why at this point in time he seemed to think it was a great idea to make this controversy, and what was accomplished by it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, did the person who he believes made the picture, has he come out and said, I made the picture?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So there's the stringer,
Yeah.
um, who they who they claim made the actual photograph, was a local who did work with NBC, as a driver and sometimes as a photographer, as a cinematographer for them. Um, he's in the film. He is interviewed. His children are interviewed. Another thing that bothers me is the first two times his daughter is interviewed, I believe she cries both times. So there's some playing with emotions that's going on in this. And And I get that a documentary film has to have some artistry applied to it. The narrative structure needs to be such that it'll hold your attention for an hour and a half or 2 hours, whatever the length of the documentary is. But then there is a line where it's gone beyond a reporting out, which is what they claim it is, to we're going to spin a tale to try and entertain you for an hour and 50 minutes. So Dave, you said that you and Zach had this conversation. I'm curious, since that hasn't been released, where did the two of you end up?
Well, you'll just have to
I
watch our review to find out.
Well,
Obviously, you're going to give it
For an
away
hour and a
here
half.
for free?
I assume
Absolutely
this is
not.
coming out after that.
I
So
was I mean to be fair, I mean I was because of the visualization at the end, that was the only thing that I was just like I'm still leaning towards Nick Ut, but like I was less sure. But then since then I've read Burnett's and I've read a lot more. I tried to stay a little bit out of it because I'm like, I don't know any of these people. Like I just and I actually hadn't I had actually planned kind of not to watch this film when it was first, a year ago, buzzed about, and I was just like, I just don't want anymore. To see this, and then and then David was like, "Oh, we're restarting Around the Lens," and I was like, "Okay, well, I guess we're watching this." But because obviously it was the conversation of the year when it comes to photojournalism. Unfortunately, like that kind of led every discussion, everything, unfortunately about it. And like as a person who's done, produced two literally investigative documentary films, and like gone through the process, and actually as a professional, like half of my work is photojournalism and the other half is actual research, like with documents and like, like showing documents and doing things like that. And I've worked for the BBC, Al Jazeera, and that was my biggest problem, is that like I kept yelling I kept yelling at during our talk about it, was just like, show. You have to show it. You can't just tell people. You have to show it. That's the basics of journalism, especially when you're saying that there's documents, there's emails, there's proof that Robinson has been talking about this forever, and then they just never show the email. They never show the thing that he's, all of the things that they're saying that he's done. Where's the rest of the photos? How is there not more photos? Did the stringer throw everything away? Then say he threw everything away. It's
So,
very convenient. Yeah, sorry.
so
Yeah.
I don't. How do I phrase this?
Hmm.
Because I'm a journalist and I believe in the codes of ethics for the National Press Photographers Association and the Society of Professional Journalists, and SPJ's part of their code is seek truth and report it. I do have to
Hmm.
say this. The fact that other negatives and prints don't exist from 1972 does not actually surprise me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
there are some photographers out there who have been stunningly good at maintaining their archives. Rick,
yeah.
the fact that you can go back to
Yeah, I'm
1992,
not that good at it.
1993 and,
Yeah.
and pull Nancy Kerrigan negatives, someplace in that filing cabinet, Nancy Kerrigan did her hometown parade in 93 or 94, and there's pictures that I made of that.
Well, if they
Um,
need more, I'll
you,
send them your way.
thanks. I'm not sure I want to pay your licensing fee though,
That's
because I'm
not
not
mine.
taking them without paying them. So, um, but you look at somebody like David Hume Kennerly, who was stunningly good at preserving his archive and all of the records. The vast majority of photographers who did wire service work in conflict zones, it was make the picture, get the
Yeah,
picture out, and go on to the next picture.
yeah,
And even the Associated Press wasn't keeping entire takes. They would
yeah.
take, a three-frame clip. The middle one is the one that they were transmitting, and they wanted one on either side. And then often the rest of those negatives would just be thrown in the trash. So the fact that there
Yeah.
aren't other images that's not a sticking point for me.
To me, it's because it's on Netflix and not on Darkroom Rumor or like an academic kind of thing. It's I try to kind of look at it as not a person who knows everything about photojournalism, and obviously, I know I was a little bit in the film era, but I was never a working photojournalist during the film era. During the when I started working when we had my D70. And so and I have an old hard drive that's dead that has all my work on it. But the big one was during when they were talking to the index people, the people that did the visualization. They really emphasized, and it was very weird that the index guys emphasized this several times, that he said, what you gave me what you gave me. And that the fact that, like, never mind, there's a sub conversation here that they didn't copyright half of the images. They stole an interview from our friend Robert Kaplan and everything like that. So there's like an ethical thing that's like underlying there that's like, oh, that's really worrying. The fact that like all of the photos were what you could pull from Getty with the, I don't know if you noticed that they still had the Getty watermark on them.
Associated Press watermark.
What's that?
So all of the AP
Yeah.
images were printed off of the
Oh,
AP Images
no, I
website.
know, but there's a couple
Yeah.
that were
So
Getty
the
as well
watermark
that
is on
like
them. Yeah.
they still had the watermark. They didn't
Yeah.
pull, they didn't buy the photo, which if
Right.
you have Netflix money, you'd think you'd at least get
Well,
that.
you think if
Um,
they didn't buy the photo, that AP and Getty are going to go after them for money.
well, you can, I mean,
So
you can buy it for
the
Getty, but what I'm saying is that what the set of photos was, that they did not take when they were doing the visualization, they did not take the full set that exist that could be gathered. And I get that maybe AP has like an archive, more photos we don't, necessarily know, but like somehow there were photos that made it into the AP report that weren't in the film and things like that, where it's just like doing the basic kind of like research again, that like visual research that you need to do to make a film about a visual moment, because you can see all those photographers and you're like, you get one photo from each of those, it was a weird thing that I kept hearing the index people say, all the
yeah.
photos that you gave me, like
Yeah.
all what you gave me. And so and they never say, here's the photos that we gave us. And I get that it's a documentary film that's for Netflix, but like, okay, you're making, as I said in the interview, or in the interview, in our conversation, was that this is probably of the number one of the Vietnam era, probably the most well-known photo. If anybody knows one photo from the Vietnam War, it's probably that photo. I have a hard time kind of thinking, and it's probably also of like general knowledge, people that just know things. If you were say a photojournalist or something like that, you may not know Nick's name, but you know that photo. Like it's in the history books in a way that photos like World War II photos, like there's a handful of things that are like maybe 25 photos that are going to be in a world, United States or United States history book that kids are going to, or high school students are going to see. And the fact that you're questioning it, like, again, that you need to prove it. If you're going to go after, if you're going to go after the king, you need to whatever, but it was that was one of my things that was just like they didn't show anything. They kept talking about things and then not show. And if you don't have that information, then you don't include it in the film. And then you can't make the film. It's like if you don't have all this evidence and everything like that, the number of projects that like I've worked and worked and worked, and we just couldn't get that information. The FOIAs didn't come in, the whatever. And it was just like, well, we can't prove our point. The BBC would never allow that. I mean, at least, 15 years ago, the BBC would have never allowed that. BBC's unfortunately changed a lot. They would never allow that to get through because they're going to go, my producer, who's a hard ass, he would say, where is this evidence? That, oh, you can't include it then. That is not an assumption because you get your ass sued off if you, especially with British libel law, if you came out with this film, in Britain. I mean, if I was Nick, that was something that I'd be considering, but that's that's a different thing. I will say, like, to your colonials comment, that was something that like throughout this full stream of things, the old hacks reunion that they included in it, where it was all of these white journalists getting together, celebrating their time in Vietnam War. And then one of them said, I forget who it was, we were all local hires. A white photojournalist saying this. We both had Vietnamese wives. Like that's how he was a local hire because he married. And it was just like, I would never, there's no amount of money. If somebody put a gun to my head and I was editing this film, the idea that that clip would be in the film is beyond, and I just can't, because it's like it's all these white heroes, coming in to save this guy from another Vietnamese guy, and it was the Gary Knight show. I mean that was the big. I think that's the why. To me, that's the why. Is Gary Knight saw this as his moment to make his agency. He riding in the bicycle to his fancy offices in the opening moment.
well,
It's yeah.
yeah. So
So I'm not
David,
going to rehash my
Yeah, sorry.
spiel from the review. You can watch it when it gets up. But bottom line is, I don't believe Nick took the photo. I believe the documentary in terms of the way it framed. Did the other guy take it? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think Nick took it. So that's my take on it. I don't necessarily concern myself too much with it beyond, this being a piece of content that was created for entertainment. Um, will it change anything on AP's side? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe. But it's why was it created? It was created because it stirs controversy, right? And we watched it and we're talking about it, and that's the reason why it was created. Um, so I found it to be an interesting sort of exploration. I agree with many of the issues raised with regard to how it was presented. I thought it was felt very artificial. That was kind of what I felt watching it. Like lots of it felt artificial and puffy and bloated. But at the end of the day, I don't think Nick took the photo. So now I'm going to move on with my life. Just like we have to move on with the rest of the show because we've been talking for a great long time. You've all provided some awesome conversation here for this episode, and I think it definitely merits more discussion. Maybe we'll have another discussion, more specifically focused on, I would say, you know, the idea of taking credit for someone else's work and why that might happen if it did happen in this particular instance, or might happen in any particular instance, because I think there is a lot of meat on the bone there with regard to that particular topic. And with regard to the whole colonialism thing, I think the film did at least try to address the issue of, you know, again, the colonialists coming into a foreign country, a distressed third world country, and then profiting off of that, appearance, right? And doing the thing in there. So I thought the film at least approached the issue. Did it do it well? Up for debate. And I think that's a debate we should have maybe in the future on another episode of Around the Lens Roundtable Discussions. We'll save that for a future episode because we're at the end of this week's episode. Thank you so much for your time, Mark and Rick. Really appreciate it. Before we say goodbye to you, where is the call to action you'd like people to go, either to learn more about yourself or to find something else? Rick, you already did your call to action at the beginning of the episode,
I
talking about all
did.
your workshop, so you're vetoed from doing any more. But Mark, is there anything you'd like to direct people toward?
Sure, a couple of things. National Press Photographers Association is the largest association for photojournalists in the country. It's been a challenging year for them. Maybe several folks in your audience probably know about that, but the NPPA is still alive. The Best of Photojournalism competition that I direct on behalf of the University of Georgia and NPPA opens for entries on December 22nd, and those will run through January 18th. The BOP is one of the three largest photojournalism competitions in the world, and it is heavily focused on journalism. It is not a photography contest. 76 different categories you can enter this year. So support your local photojournalists, support the NPPA, support the BOP. And if you're interested in studying photojournalism and you're a high school student, feel free to reach out to me. I'm real easy to find on UGA's website. And despite my disagreement with David here, I'm happy that I had him as a student. And if you think he's a smart guy, I would like to think that I had a very, very tiny bit of influence over him many years ago. So.
You had a great big lots of influence on me. You captured me in a very influential period of my time. So thank you for not disowning me for my difference of opinions. I appreciate it.
I am perfectly good with differences of opinions if they are well articulated, and you articulated it well. So
Oh, thank you. I try.
that liberal
I try.
arts education is paying off really, really well for you. Just want you to hear that. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, if I ever need a job, can I get a letter of recommendation from you?
I'm more than happy to do that for you, David.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. Now, Rick, is there anything you want to plug before I know that you didn't
Well, let me
already plug?
see. We've got these workshops. I was going to say, if you want to, folks want to see what it is that I do, you can go to rickfriedman.com, or you can go find me on Facebook at Rick Friedman, or Instagram at Rick Friedman Pics. And last thing I'll throw in, very recently, the folks from Digital Photo Academy, Richard Rabinowitz, reached out and said, I want to do a retrospective on your life's work. To which I responded, it's not over yet. But anyway, they very nicely did this. It's a 26-minute video, that encompasses a bit of my work, and I've been lucky enough to do what I've been able to do. And there's a link on any of my social media. So if you have a few minutes to kill, have a look. I'd appreciate it. And to anybody watching, if I can answer lighting questions, it's rick@rickfriedman.com. I'm happy to help
Wonderful.
out.
Yeah, and I actually wrote an article for our website about that particular video. So if you're looking for where to get to it, go to aroundthelens.com. Zach, anything you want to plug besides vsu.news?
That's it. Vsu.news. Sorry, I have a couple news stories up that I've done lately.
Cool.
I'm also over at emeraldcityvideo.net. I do entertainment stuff. I'm doing a series completely not 12 days of Christmas-ish movies that are you think like Die Hard is a Christmas-ish movie. It's not really a Christmas movie, but it's kind of is.
It's a Christmas movie.
Yeah, no, I know.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's absolutely.
But like in Bruges, I've talked about In Bruges, Long Kiss Goodnight, and like I have to write one tonight. So yeah, it's going to be Trading Places, by the way, which is
Yeah.
a fantastic Christmas movie. So
Awesome. That's great. Well, I was might say that you might see some of my work on fstoppers.com. I started working as a contributing writer to that website, so I'll be splitting my time between this and them, but I think there's more than enough bandwidth and stories to go around. So look for me on that website. All right, that's been Around the Lens Roundtable Discussions for Rick Friedman, Mark Johnson, and Zach Roberts. I'm David J. Murphy, and we are out of here. See you, everybody.
Good night.